often I'm asked, you're a behavior analyst, how can you provide leadership to a company? You didn't have any business classes, which I never had one business class ever. How can you know the labor laws, which I don't know those either. Learned a lot of things the hard. I learned a lot of things the hard way, and what is shocking to me day in day out is that the applied behavior analysis and the science of behavior analysis doesn't permeate through the fabric of schools and organizations, and we're so good at it on a micro level to be able to provide good behavior analytic scientific principles with kids and with adults, and it's still not considered mainstream in schools, and that's something Dr. Vargas and I were speaking about. Sometimes when you have to break new ground, you're criticized a bit, like Dr. Skinner was, with some of his contraptions and trying to be able to track operant behavior by creating mechanisms that were different than the runway, that are operant chambers. So there's criticism. So we find ourselves constantly pushing the envelope and possibly risking things in order to further the science and run things with applied behavior analytic principles. I just want to ask you this question. By a show of hands, how many people here, not necessarily your supervisor might be here, so you don't have to raise your hand if you're uncomfortable. How many people have worked in organizations historically where you've really, really worked hard and you've demonstrated high levels of performance, you got more work, no extra pay, but the lazy worker was complacent and got paid the same amount? I'm just showing my hands. Oh my goodness. Okay, I think just about everybody did. There's nothing that irks me more than that. I mean, we come across situations in our company sometimes where, and through schools, where someone says, I don't want any extra pay. I want to do this. It's something I'm passionate about. Well, our leadership determines, well, you're getting it no matter what, because we understand that long-term, sustained, consistent, excellent performance has to be tied to financial as well as social recognition and things like that, because they have, if you're going to think, we don't apply the principles of applied behavior analysis to the workplace. If you think about it, everyone who sat for the board exam knows that if you're going to increase the response effort of the learner and start to add tokens to a system, at some point you'll come across ratio strain where the reward is no longer as rewarding if you went from 3 tokens to 10 tokens and then got the same small piece of candy or something like that for that reward. So we've all learned when we take the board exam that one of the questions is, if you're going to require increased response effort, then the magnitude of the reinforcer must be bigger, correct? That's one of the test questions. So why in the world do we do this? We dump on the good employee, and the message is that if you're salaried, you get by with just doing the bare minimum and consequently being paid the same. So it's something that's a big problem, and it's of epidemic proportions. Steve Jobs, I think, there's things I respected about him, things I didn't, but one of the things that he said that resonated with me is that if today were the last day of my life, what I want to do, what I'm about to do today, was a question he would ask himself regularly. And he said, if the answer is no for too many days in a row, something has to change. And I've been in that situation before where the answer was no too many times, and I was operating under contingencies of negative reinforcement. Going to the job, not having creativity, not having a niche, not having one thing I'm interested in, and getting a sick feeling in my stomach where I knew I wasn't giving it my best, and somehow indirectly, because I wasn't excited every day, that the kids were affected by that. And many people in this room may have had that feeling. So complacency in the workplace is almost of epidemic proportions. I would say. So some statistics, the U.S. Gallup poll in 2005 indicated that 45% of Americans or only 45% are satisfied with recognition they receive at work. How can less than half of people be satisfied with the type of recognition they receive? Turnover is at staggering rates. The voluntary turnover in organizations is almost 25% almost of the workforce. And that's voluntary turnover. That's not people that were terminated involuntary for performance problems. What are the costs of turnover? What we're talking about today is how do we use the principles of applied behavior analysis to boost the economy, to practice what we preach, reduce complacency, and let me show you some of the financial aspects of turnover. Did you know that replacing an employee costs anywhere between half the salary to 5 times the salary of that employee? Okay, so if an employee was paid $35,000 a year, and you had a 100-person company, and if you lost 25% of those people, and it costs 5 times $35,000 for their training and hiring and recruiting and advertising, it costs $4 million. This is one of the problems we have today, and especially in the nonprofit world, and especially in human services.